The stranger rode into Red Hollow at sundown with a dead man's warrant in his pocket and murder on his mind. Cal Rowan wasn't there to keep the peace. He was there to shatter it. Behind the tin star pinned to his chest lay a vendetta 15 years cold, a stolen fortune never recovered, and 3 names he'd hunted across every blood-soaked mile between here and the Mexican border. One of those names belonged to a ghost. The other 2 were still breathing. And somewhere in this powder-keg town where farmers and cattle barons stood at each other's throats, the truth was buried deep enough to kill for. If you're watching from somewhere in this wild world of ours, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story rides. And if Red Hollow gets its hooks in you, hit that like button and settle in. This tale's got 5 parts, and every single one of them bleeds. The horse beneath Cal Rowan was lathered and blowing hard by the time Red Hollow's crooked main street came into view. Dust rose in curtains from the animal's hooves, and the late afternoon sun hammered down on the valley like God's own anvil, turning everything the color of old blood and copper. Cal pulled his hat lower, squinting against the glare, and took his first real measure of the place he'd been riding toward for the better part of 3 weeks. Red Hollow wasn't much to look at. A dozen buildings lined either side of a rutted dirt road that probably turned to knee-deep mud when the rains came. A general store with peeling paint, a livery stable that looked like it might collapse if you sneezed hard enough, a saloon with broken shutters and a sign that had once read Lucky Dollar but now just said Ucky Doll in faded letters. At the far end of the street sat a squat jailhouse made of adobe and timber, its door hanging crooked on leather hinges. But it wasn't the buildings that told Cal what kind of town this was. It was the people, or rather, the way they moved. Every man on that street carried himself like he expected a bullet from any direction. They walked close to the walls, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. Women crossed the road in hurried clusters, clutching shawls tight even in the heat. A boy leading a mule didn't look up once, just kept his head down and his pace quick. Nobody lingered. Nobody laughed. The whole place had the feel of a graveyard where the dead hadn't quite figured out they were supposed to lie still. Cal had seen towns like this before, places where fear had settled in so deep it had become the foundation everything else was built on. He dismounted in front of the jailhouse, looped his reins around the hitching post, and stood there for a moment, letting the street get a good look at him. He was a tall man, lean in the way that comes from living hard and eating light, with a face weathered by sun and wind until it looked like it had been carved from the same sandstone as the cliffs surrounding the valley. His coat was dusty, his boots worn down at the heels, and the Colt 45 on his hip showed the kind of use that comes from necessity, not vanity. The tin star pinned to his chest caught the light and flashed like a signal flare. New sheriff in town. Cal didn't believe in the law the way some men did. He'd seen too many crooked judges, too many bought and paid for marshals, too many times when justice was just another word for whoever had the most guns. But a badge was useful. It opened doors. It made people talk when they might otherwise keep their mouths shut. And in a place like Red Hollow, where the law was clearly just a thin coat of paint over something rotten, a badge could get a man close enough to the truth to put a bullet in it. He pushed open the jailhouse door. The inside smelled like sweat, tobacco, and old coffee. A desk sat against the far wall, covered in papers and dust. A gun rack held 2 rifles, both in sorry shape. There were 2 cells in the back, both empty, their doors standing open like mouths waiting to be fed. And sitting in a chair with his feet propped on the desk was a man who looked like he'd given up on life about 10 years ago and was just waiting for his body to catch up. The man glanced up bleary-eyed and squinted at Cal. "You the new sheriff?" "That's right." "Well, hell." The man dropped his feet to the floor and stood, swaying slightly. He was short and round, with a graying beard that hadn't seen a comb in weeks. "Name's Becker. I've been holding down the fort till you got here, if you can call it that." Cal looked around the shabby office. "This is the fort?" "More or less." Becker scratched his belly. Ain't much, I know. Last sheriff cleared out about 2 months back. Said he didn't get paid enough to die in a range war. And I can't say I blame him." "Range war," Cal said flatly. "That's right." Becker shuffled over to a dented coffee pot sitting on a small stove and poured himself a cup of something that looked like it might strip paint. "You picked a hell of a time to take this job, friend. Farmers and cattle barons been at each other's throats for near a year now. Used to be just words and threats. Lately it's turned to fists, fires, and a couple shootings. Whole valleys about ready to go up like a matchbox. Cal took off his hat and set it on the desk. Who's running the cattle side? Man named Silas Vane. Runs the Broken V Ranch about 5 miles north. Big operation. Brings in herds from Texas, fattens them up on the grasslands, sells them off. Or that's what he says he does. Way I hear it, he's got his fingers in just about everything. Land deals, water rights, freight contracts. If there's money to be made in this valley, Silas wants his cut. And the farmers? Settlers, mostly. Came out here 5-6 years back when the railroad promised land grants and cheap acres. They got their deeds fair and square, but Silas don't see it that way. Says they're squatting on rangeland that's always belonged to cattle. Says they're fencing off water, driving up costs, ruining the open range. He's been putting pressure on them to sell out and move on. What kind of pressure? Becker took a long sip of his coffee and grimaced. The kind that involves burned barns and dead livestock. The kind that makes families pack up in the middle of the night and run. The kind that turns neighbors into enemies because nobody knows who to trust anymore. Cal's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. And what's the law been doing about it? Becker snorted. You're looking at it. Me and a badge that ain't worth the tin it's made from. I'm just a deputy, Rowan. I keep drunks from killing each other on Saturday nights and make sure nobody steals the mayor's horse. Anything bigger than that, I ain't got the guns or the guts to handle. Then it's a good thing I'm here. Becker gave him a long, measuring look. You talk like a man who ain't afraid of much. I've been afraid, Cal said, just not of men like Silas Vane. Well, you'll get your chance to meet him soon enough. He comes into town most Fridays to settle accounts and make sure folks remember who runs things. That's tomorrow. Cal nodded slowly. Good. I'll be ready. Becker set down his cup and scratched his beard again. You mind if I ask you something, Sheriff? Go ahead. Why'd you take this job? Ain't no secret this town's a mess. Pays lousy. The work's dangerous. And there's a better than even chance you'll end up face down in the dirt before the year's out. So why come here? Cal met the man's eyes and lied without hesitation. Because somebody has to. Becker grunted. Well, I hope you're as tough as you look. You're gonna need to be. Cal spent the rest of the evening walking the town, getting the lay of the land. He moved slow and deliberate, letting people see him, letting the badge do its work. Most folks avoided his gaze, but a few nodded cautiously, like they were testing the waters to see if this new sheriff was worth trusting. He stopped at the general store and bought supplies: coffee, jerky, a box of cartridges. The shopkeeper, a nervous man with thinning hair, barely said 2 words to him. At the livery stable, he arranged to board his horse and got the same wary silence. It was like the whole town had learned to keep its mouth shut and its head down, and Cal couldn't blame them. When violence is the currency of the day, talking too much can get you killed. As the sun dipped below the mountains and the sky turned the color of a bruise, Cal made his way to the saloon. The Lucky Dollar, or what was left of it, was doing a brisk business. The air inside was thick with smoke and the smell of spilled whiskey. Men crowded around tables, playing cards and muttering in low voices. A few looked up when Cal walked in, and the room went a shade quieter. Cal ignored them and walked to the bar. The bartender, a scarred man with a missing finger, slid a glass toward him without being asked. Whiskey? Water, Cal said. The bartender raised an eyebrow but poured it anyway. You're the new sheriff. Word travels fast. Small town? Not much else to talk about. The bartender leaned on the bar, studying Cal. You come here to stop the fightin' or just to pick a side? I came here to do my job. And what's that exactly? Keep the peace. The bartender laughed, short and bitter. Good luck with that. Peace ain't something this town's real familiar with. Cal took a sip of water. Then maybe it's time it learned. Before the bartender could respond, the saloon door swung open hard enough to bang against the wall. 3 men walked in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man in front was broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, with a face like a slab of granite and eyes that looked like they'd been chipped out of flint. He wore a long coat despite the heat, and the butt of a revolver stuck out from his belt. Behind him came 2 others, one tall and rangy, the other shorter but built like a bull. All 3 moved with the easy confidence of men who were used to being the most dangerous thing in any room they entered. The broad-shouldered man scanned the bar and his gaze landed on Cal. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well," he said, his voice like gravel rolling down a mountainside. "The new sheriff. Heard you rode in today." Cal set down his glass and turned to face the man. "You heard right. Name's Garrett. I work for Silas Vane." Garrett took a step closer, and the two men behind him spread out slightly, flanking him. "Mr. Vane wanted me to come by and introduce myself. Make sure you understand how things work around here." "I'm listening." Garrett's smile widened. "Red Hollow's got a delicate situation, Sheriff. Lot of tension, lot of folks on edge. Now, Mr. Vane's a reasonable man. He don't want trouble. But he also don't want some outsider coming in and stirring up problems where there don't need to be any." "Is that a fact?" "It is. See, the way things have been working is simple. The cattle side keeps to its business, the farmers keep to theirs, and the law stays out of the way. Long as everybody remembers their place, nobody gets hurt. You follow me?" Cal's expression didn't change. "I follow you just fine. And here's what I want you to take back to Mr. Vane. I didn't come here to take sides. I came here to enforce the law. That means if somebody breaks it, I'm coming for them. I don't care if they're a farmer, a rancher, or the President of the United States. And I sure as hell don't care what Silas Vane thinks about it." The room had gone dead silent now. Every man in the saloon was watching, and most of them looked like they were holding their breath. Garrett's smile faded. "That's a real bold thing to say, Sheriff." "It's not bold, it's just the truth. You might want to be careful how you talk. Mr. Vane's got a lot of friends in this valley, and he don't take kindly to disrespect." Cal took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. He was taller than Garrett by a couple of inches, and he used every bit of it. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried. "You go back and tell Silas Vane that the law's in Red Hollow, now. And if he's got a problem with that, he can come see me himself. But if he sends you or any of his other dogs to threaten me again, I'll put you in a cell. Or a grave. Whichever's more convenient." For a long moment, nobody moved. The air felt like it was crackling, charged with the kind of tension that comes right before a storm breaks. Then Garrett laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You got stones, Sheriff. I'll give you that. But stones don't stop bullets." "Maybe not," Cal said, "but I do." Garrett stared at him for another beat, then turned and walked toward the door. His two men followed. At the threshold, Garrett stopped and looked back. "See you around, Sheriff." "Count on it." The three men left, and the door swung shut behind them. Slowly, the noise in the saloon began to pick up again, but it was different now, edgier, like everyone knew they'd just witnessed something that couldn't be taken back. The bartender let out a breath he'd been holding. "You just made yourself an enemy, Sheriff." "I've had worse." "Maybe, but Silas Vane ain't a man you want on your bad side. He's got money, guns, and no conscience. That's a dangerous combination." Cal finished his water and set the glass down. "So do I." The next morning, Cal was up before dawn. He checked his weapons, cleaned his rifle, and made sure his Colt was loaded and ready. Then he walked the perimeter of the town, noting the sight lines, the alleys, the places where a man could hide if he wanted to ambush someone. Old habits from a life spent hunting men who didn't want to be found. By mid-morning, the town was starting to come alive. Wagons rolled in from the surrounding farms, bringing goods to trade. Women gathered at the general store, their voices hushed and cautious. Men stood in clusters, smoking and talking, but their hands were never far from their guns. Cal stood in front of the jailhouse, arms crossed, watching it all. He knew people were watching him in return, sizing him up, trying to decide if he was the kind of man who could make a difference or just another fool who'd be dead inside a month. Around noon, a wagon came rattling down the street, pulled by a pair of tired-looking mules. At the reins was a man in his early 40s, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that had seen hard work and harder times. Beside him sat a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that were sharp and wary. The man pulled the wagon to a stop near the general store and climbed down. The woman followed, moving with a quiet grace that caught Cal's attention despite himself. As they walked toward the store, the man's gaze landed on Cal and the badge on his chest. He hesitated, then changed direction and walked over. "You're the new sheriff," the man said. It wasn't a question. "That's right." The man extended a hand. Elias Ward, I run a farm about 8 miles south of here. This is my niece, Lila. Cal shook his hand. Elias's grip was firm, calloused from years of hard labor. Lila nodded politely, but didn't offer her hand. Cal noticed the way her eyes flicked over him, taking his measure just as surely as he was taking theirs. Heard you had a run-in with Garrett last night, Elias said. News travels fast. It does, especially news like that. Elias glanced around, then lowered his voice. I don't know what you think you're walking into here, Sheriff, but you should know this valley's about to explode. Silas Vane's been pushing the settlers hard, and folks are getting desperate. Some of them are talking about pushing back. And you? Me? Elias's expression was hard to read. I just want to keep my family safe and my land intact. I ain't looking for a fight, but if one comes to my door, I won't run from it either. Cal studied him. There was something about Elias Ward, something calm and steady on the surface, but with currents running deep underneath, the kind of man who'd learned to keep his secrets close. I appreciate the warning, Cal said. Elias nodded. Just be careful, Sheriff. This town's got more ghosts than you think, and some of them are still walking. Before Cal could respond, Lila spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet but clear. He's right. People here are scared, and scared people do stupid things. If you're really here to help, you'd better be ready for what's coming. Cal met her gaze and saw something there. Intelligence, resolve, and a sadness that seemed older than her years. I'll be ready. Elias touched the brim of his hat. Good luck, Sheriff. You're going to need it. The two of them walked into the general store, leaving Cal standing alone on the street. He watched them go, his mind turning over what Elias had said. Ghosts. Cal knew all about ghosts. He'd been chasing one for 15 years. That afternoon, the town's fragile peace shattered like glass. It started with shouting near the edge of town, where the road forked toward the northern ranches. Cal heard it from the jailhouse and grabbed his rifle, moving fast. By the time he reached the commotion, a crowd had gathered. At the center of it were two men, one a farmer Cal didn't recognize, the other a cowhand wearing the broken V brand on his vest. They were shouting at each other, faces red, fists clenched. You cut my fence, the farmer yelled. That's the third time this month. Your fence is on rangeland, the cowhand shot back. You got no right to it. I got a deed that says otherwise. Deeds don't mean nothing out here. The crowd was growing, and Cal could feel the tension rising like heat off a fire. Men were picking sides, hands drifting toward gun belts. This was how it started. One stupid argument, one spark, and the whole thing would go up in flames. Cal stepped between them, rifle held low, but ready. That's enough. Both men turned to glare at him. This ain't your business, Sheriff, the cowhand said. Everything in this town is my business. Now step back, both of you. The farmer jabbed a finger at the cowhand. He's been tearing down my fence. I got a right to protect my property. And I got a right to move cattle through land that ain't yours, the cowhand snapped. Show me the deed, Cal said to the farmer. The farmer blinked. What? You said you've got a deed. Show it to me. The man hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. Cal took it, scanned it quickly. The deed looked legitimate, signed, stamped, dated. It granted the farmer 160 acres of land, including the disputed section. Cal handed it back and turned to the cowhand. He's got legal claim. That means the fence stays. The cowhand's face went dark. Silas ain't gonna like that. Oh, Silas doesn't have to like it. It's the law. You just made a mistake, Sheriff. Cal's voice went cold. The only mistake here is you thinking you can intimidate me. Now get out of my sight before I arrest you for trespassing and destruction of property. The cowhand stared at him, jaw tight, then spat into the dirt and turned away. As he walked off, he called back over his shoulder. This ain't over. Yeah, it is, Cal said. The crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves. The farmer looked at Cal with something like hope in his eyes. Thank you, Sheriff. Cal just nodded. He didn't tell the man that what he'd just done had likely painted a target on both their backs. That night, Cal lay on the cot in the back room of the jailhouse, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did when he was this close. 15 years ago, a gang of outlaws had hit a payroll shipment outside Amarillo. 4 men, brutal and efficient. They'd killed 3 guards, made off with $30,000 in gold, and vanished into the Badlands like smoke. Cal had been a young lawman then, hungry and idealistic, and he'd been part of the posse that went after them. They'd tracked the gang for weeks, following cold trails and dead ends. Finally, they'd cornered them in a box canyon. The fight had been short and bloody. 2 of the outlaws had died in the gunfight. The 3rd had been captured, tried, and hanged. But the 4th, the leader, had escaped, and the gold had never been recovered. The leader's name was Samuel Ward. Cal had spent years hunting him, chasing rumors and whispers across half the frontier. And then, 3 months ago, he'd gotten word that Samuel Ward was dead, killed in a gunfight in some nameless Arizona town. But the gold was still missing, and so were the 2 men who'd ridden with Samuel after the original gang fell apart. Cal had tracked every lead, followed every thread, and they'd all pointed him here, to Red Hollow, to a quiet farmer named Elias Ward. Elias Ward. Samuel Ward. It couldn't be a coincidence. Cal closed his eyes and let the old anger settle over him like a familiar coat. He'd come to Red Hollow wearing a badge, but that badge was just a tool. What he really wanted was the truth. And if Elias Ward was connected to that long-ago robbery, Cal would find out, even if he had to burn the whole town down to do it. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and in the darkness, Red Hollow slept uneasily, balanced on the edge of a knife. The next day was Friday, and Silas Vane came to town. Cal heard the horses before he saw them, a dozen riders moving in tight formation, raising dust like a war party. He stepped out of the jailhouse and stood in the street, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching them come. Silas Vane rode at the front, and he was exactly what Cal had expected. Tall and broad, with iron gray hair and a face carved from stone. He wore expensive clothes, tailored coat, polished boots, a hat that probably cost more than most men in Red Hollow, made in a month. But his eyes were what caught Cal's attention, cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. The riders pulled up in front of the general store, and Silas dismounted with the ease of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. He handed his reins to one of his men and walked slowly down the street, his gaze sweeping over the town like he was taking inventory of his property. When his eyes landed on Cal, he stopped. For a long moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. The street had gone quiet again, and Cal could feel the weight of 100 watching eyes. Finally, Silas smiled. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit. "You must be the new sheriff," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a man who'd learned to hide his cruelty behind a veneer of civility. "That's right. Silas Vane." He didn't offer his hand. "I own the Broken V, largest ranch in the valley. I employ half the men in this town, and I keep the other half fed. So when I heard a new lawman had arrived, I thought I'd come introduce myself. Make sure we understand each other." "I understand you just fine, Mr. Vane." Silas's smile widened. "Do you? Because I've heard some troubling things. Heard you've been making decisions without consulting me. Heard you threaten one of my men. Heard you think you can walk into my valley and change the way things work." "Your valley?" Cal's voice was flat. "Last I checked, this was public land, and the law applies to everyone, even you." Silas's smile didn't falter, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "The law is a useful tool, Sheriff, but it's only as strong as the man who wields it. And out here, strength is measured in cattle, land, and gold, not tin stars." "Then I guess we'll see how much your gold is worth when I start enforcing the law." The air between them crackled. Silas took a step closer, and Cal held his ground. "Let me give you some advice, Sheriff," Silas said quietly. "This valley's got a natural order. Cattle need land. Land needs water. And the weak get pushed aside to make room for the strong. That's how it's always been, and that's how it's going to stay. You try to fight it, you'll end up just like every other fool who thought he could change things, dead and forgotten." Cal met his gaze without blinking. "Maybe. Or maybe you'll be the one who ends up in a cell, or a grave." Silas's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, Cal thought the man might go for his gun. But Silas was too smart for that. He knew a dozen witnesses were watching, and killing a sheriff in broad daylight would bring federal marshals down on him faster than he could blink. Instead, Silas stepped back and tipped his hat mockingly. Enjoy your time in Red Hollow, Sheriff, however long it lasts." He turned and walked back to his horse. His men mounted up, and the whole group rode out of town in a cloud of dust and danger. Cal stood in the street, watching them go, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. Becker appeared at his elbow, looking pale. "You just declared war on the most powerful man in the territory." "No," Cal said. "He declared war on me a long time ago. I'm just letting him know I showed up to fight." And as the dust settled over Red Hollow, Cal knew one thing for certain. The battle lines had been drawn. And before this was over, blood would spill on both sides. The week that followed Silas Vane's visit moved like a storm gathering on the horizon. Slow at first, but heavy with the promise of violence. Cal felt it in the way men walked the streets, in the tension that hung over Red Hollow like a noose waiting to drop. The town had always been afraid, but now that fear had sharpened into something else. Anticipation. The certainty that blood was coming, and the only question left was whose. Cal spent his days visible, walking the streets with his rifle cradled in his arms, making sure everyone knew the law had teeth now. He broke up fights before they could escalate, warned off Vane's men when they came sniffing around the settler farms, and made it clear that the days of intimidation without consequence were over. It earned him nods of respect from the farmers and looks of pure hatred from the cattle hands. Cal didn't care about either. Respect and hatred were both useful, and he'd learned long ago how to turn them into leverage. But at night, alone in the jailhouse, his thoughts turned darker. He'd come to Red Hollow hunting ghosts, and the closer he looked, the more convinced he became that Elias Ward was hiding something. The name alone was too much of a coincidence. Samuel Ward had been a careful man, smart enough to stay one step ahead of the law for years. If he'd had a brother, and Cal's digging had suggested he might, then it made sense that brother would have taken a new name, settled somewhere quiet, and kept his head down. Elias fit the profile. He was the right age, had the kind of calm competence that came from experience, and there was a hardness buried deep in his eyes that didn't come from farming. Cal had seen that look before, in men who'd lived violent lives and were trying to outrun their pasts. The problem was, Cal liked him. He'd seen Elias around town several times since that first meeting, and every interaction had only deepened the impression of a man who was steady, thoughtful, and genuinely trying to do right by the people around him. He didn't posture or brag. He didn't push for conflict. He just worked his land, looked after his niece, and kept his business to himself. If Cal had met him under different circumstances, they might have been friends. But friendship didn't change the facts, and if Elias Ward was connected to that robbery, Cal would see him hang for it. On the 8th day after Silas's visit, the first real violence came. Cal was making his morning rounds when he heard the commotion near the edge of town. He broke into a run, boots pounding the dirt, and arrived to find a crowd gathered around a wagon that had been overturned in the road. Sacks of grain lay scattered in the dust, torn open and trampled. A man lay nearby, clutching his ribs and gasping for air. Cal pushed through the crowd and knelt beside him. It was the same farmer who'd argued with the cowhand over the fence, a man named Howell. His face was bruised, his lips split, and there was blood on his shirt. "What happened?" Cal demanded. Howell coughed, wincing. "Vane's men, 3 of them, stopped me on the road, said I was trespassing. I told them I was just bringing grain to town, same as always. They didn't care. Beat me, tipped my wagon, ruined half my load." Cal's jaw tightened. "You recognize them?" "One was Garrett, the big one. He's the one who hit me." Cal stood and turned to the crowd. "Anybody else see this?" A few people nodded, but nobody spoke up. Fear had taught them to keep their mouths shut, and Cal couldn't blame them. Testifying against Silas Vane's men was a good way to end up dead. He helped Howell to his feet and got 2 men to right the wagon. Most of the grain was ruined, and Howell looked like he wanted to cry. Cal put a hand on his shoulder. "Get yourself to the doctor. I'll handle this." "Ain't nothing you can do, Sheriff," Howell said bitterly. "Vane owns this valley. He can do whatever he wants." "Not anymore." Cal left Howell with the crowd and walked straight to the livery stable. He saddled his horse, checked his weapons, and rode north toward the broken V. The ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom, all rolling grassland and timber fences, with cattle grazing as far as the eye could see. The main house sat on a rise overlooking the operation, a 2-story structure built from stone and timber, with a wide porch and glass windows that glinted in the morning sun. It looked more like a manor house than a ranch, and that told Cal everything he needed to know about Silas Vane's ambitions. A half-dozen men were working near the corrals when Cal rode up. They stopped what they were doing and watched him approach, hands drifting toward their guns. Cal ignored them and dismounted near the house. Before he could knock, the door opened and Garrett stepped out, a smirk on his face. Well, well, the sheriff comes calling. You here to apologize or just to get yourself killed? I'm here for you, Cal said. You're under arrest for assault and destruction of property. Garrett laughed. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? The smirk faded. You got no jurisdiction out here, Rowan. This is private land. Jurisdiction follows the crime. You committed assault on a public road. That makes it my business. Garrett took a step forward, and the men near the corrals started drifting closer. Cal's hand moved to his Colt, and the movement was enough to freeze everyone in place. Here's how this is going to work, Cal said, his voice calm and cold. You're going to come with me, peacefully, and you're going to sit in a cell until you stand trial. Or you can resist, and I'll put a bullet in you right here. Your choice. For a moment, Garrett looked like he was seriously considering it. Then a voice cut through the tension like a knife. Garrett, stand down. Silas Vane stepped out onto the porch, dressed in a fine shirt and vest, a cigar clamped between his teeth. He looked at Cal with the kind of detached interest a man might show a bug he was about to crush. Sheriff Rowan, Silas said, his tone mocking, to what do I owe the pleasure? Your man assaulted a farmer on the public road this morning. I'm taking him in. Silas puffed on his cigar, considering. Is that so? Garrett, did you assault anyone this morning? Garrett shot Cal a venomous look. I had a conversation with a man who was trespassing. Things got heated. He fell down. He fell down, Silas repeated, as if testing the words. Sounds like an accident to me. It wasn't an accident, Cal said. And if you try to protect him, I'll arrest you for obstruction. Silas's smile was thin and dangerous. You think you can come onto my land and threaten me, Sheriff? You think that badge means anything out here? It means I enforce the law, and the law says your man's going to jail. Silas studied him for a long moment, then turned to Garrett. Go with him. Garrett's eyes widened. Boss, I said go with him. Silas's voice was flat, final. Spend a night in jail? Let the good people of Red Hollow see that I'm a reasonable man who respects the law. Then we'll see about getting you out. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. He walked down the steps, glaring at Cal with enough hatred to burn a hole through steel. Cal pulled out a pair of iron cuffs and locked them around Garrett's wrists. The big man didn't resist, but the muscles in his jaw were so tight they looked ready to snap. Smart choice, Cal said. Silas took another puff on his cigar, his eyes never leaving Cal. Enjoy your little victory, Sheriff. But don't get too comfortable. This valley has a way of chewing up men like you and spitting them out. I've been chewed up before, Cal said. I'm still here. He mounted his horse, Garrett walking beside him on foot, and rode back toward town. Behind them, the broken V stood like a fortress, and Cal knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The ride back was tense and silent. Garrett walked with his head down, boots scuffing the dirt, but Cal could feel the rage radiating off him like heat from a forge. When they reached Red Hollow, a small crowd had gathered, word of the arrest having spread faster than wildfire. People watched in silence as Cal led Garrett into the jailhouse and locked him in one of the cells. Garrett gripped the bars, his knuckles white. You just signed your own death warrant, Rowan. Maybe, Cal said, but you're still in a cage. He walked out, leaving Garrett to stew in his fury. That night, Cal sat at the desk in the jailhouse, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. Becker had gone home hours ago, muttering about how arresting Garrett was going to bring hell down on all of them. Cal figured he was probably right, but that didn't change anything. If he backed down now, the whole town would know the law was just empty words, and Silas Vane would own Red Hollow forever. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Cal set down his rifle and opened it to find Lila Ward standing on the step, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cool night air. Miss Ward, Cal said, surprised. It's late. I know. I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to speak with you. May I come in? Cal stepped aside and she entered, glancing briefly at Garrett's cell. The big man was asleep on his cot, snoring like a bear. Lila turned back to Cal, her expression serious. I heard what you did today, she said. Arresting Garrett. That took courage. It was the law. Nothing more. It was more than that, and you know it. Nobody stood up to Silas Vane in years. People are starting to hope again. And hope's a dangerous thing in a place like this. Cal gestured to a chair and she sat. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. What can I do for you, Miss Ward? She hesitated, then met his eyes. My uncle asked me to come. He wanted me to warn you. But warn me about what? Silas isn't going to let this stand. He can't afford to. If people see that you can arrest his men without consequence, it undermines everything he's built. He'll come after you, maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, it won't be fair or legal. It'll be brutal. Cal nodded slowly. I appreciate the warning, but I knew the risks when I took this job. Lila studied him, her dark eyes searching his face. Did you? Because I don't think you understand what you're dealing with. Silas Vane isn't just a rancher. He's got connections, judges, politicians, even federal agents. He's untouchable. Nobody's untouchable. Maybe not, but he's close. She paused, then leaned forward slightly. There's something else. My uncle thinks you're not just here to keep the peace. He thinks you're hunting something, or someone. Cal kept his expression neutral, but his pulse quickened. Why would he think that? Because you ask questions. You watch people. You're careful in a way that lawmen usually aren't. And when you look at him, there's something in your eyes, like you're trying to see past the surface. Cal was silent for a moment. Lila Ward was sharper than he'd given her credit for. Your uncle's perceptive. He's had to be. This valley's not kind to people who don't pay attention. She stood, pulling the shawl tighter. Whatever you're looking for, Sheriff, I hope it's worth what it's going to cost. Because if you keep pushing, people are going to get hurt. Good people. I didn't come here to hurt anyone. Maybe not, but sometimes good intentions don't matter. Sometimes all that matters is what you're willing to sacrifice to get what you want. She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. My uncle's a good man, Sheriff. Whatever you think you know about him, you're wrong. Before Cal could respond, she was gone, slipping into the night like a shadow. Cal stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. Lila's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, he felt a flicker of doubt. What if he was wrong? What if Elias Ward had nothing to do with the robbery, and Cal was chasing a ghost that didn't exist? But the doubts didn't last long. Cal had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that Elias was hiding something. The question was what, and whether it had anything to do with $30,000 in stolen gold. The next morning, a lawyer arrived from the territorial capital, a thin man in a rumpled suit who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He met with Garrett for an hour, then emerged and demanded that Cal release his client immediately. On what grounds? Cal asked. Lack of evidence. You have no witnesses willing to testify, and my client denies the charges. Under territorial law, you can't hold him without proof. Cal's jaw tightened. The lawyer was right. Howell had been too afraid to make a formal statement, and without witnesses, the case would fall apart the moment it went before a judge. Fine, Cal said. He walks, but tell Silas Vane this isn't over. The lawyer smirked. Mr. Vane is well aware, Sheriff. Cal unlocked the cell, and Garrett walked out, his grin smug and triumphant. He stopped in front of Cal and leaned in close. Told you this was a mistake, he whispered. See you real soon, Sheriff. Then he was gone, and Cal was left standing in the empty jailhouse, fury and frustration boiling in his chest. He'd made his stand, but Silas had outmaneuvered him with lawyers and fear. The message was clear. The law might have teeth, but Silas Vane had sharper ones. Over the next few days, the tension in Red Hollow ratcheted higher. There were more incidents, fences cut, livestock driven off, barns set afire in the dead of night. The settlers were terrified, and some began talking about leaving, packing up, and heading for safer territory. Cal tried to reassure them, tried to tell them the law would protect them, but the words felt hollow even to him. He needed leverage. He needed proof that would break Silas Vane's hold on the valley. And the only way to get it was to dig deeper into the mystery that had brought him here in the first place. Cal began spending his evenings in the saloon, buying drinks and listening to the gossip. He learned that Elias Ward had come to Red Hollow about 6 years ago, arriving with little more than a wagon, a niece, and enough money to buy a piece of land. He'd kept to himself at first, building his farm slowly and carefully, never making trouble, never drawing attention. But he'd also never talked about where he'd come from or what he'd done before. It was the kind of story that could describe any number of settlers, or it could describe a man running from his past. Cal also learned that Elias had a reputation as a man who could handle himself. A few years back, when rustlers had tried to steal his cattle, Elias had tracked them down alone and brought back his herd without firing a shot. Nobody knew exactly what he'd done, but the rustlers had never come back. And once, when a drifter had gotten too friendly with Lila, Elias had made it clear the man wasn't welcome. The drifter had left town the next morning, bruised and limping. The more Cal learned, the more certain he became. Elias Ward wasn't just a farmer. He was a man with skills, dangerous skills, that didn't come from plowing fields. One evening, Cal rode out to the Ward farm. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, and the land stretched out in all directions, vast and empty. The farmhouse was small but well kept, with a barn and a corral nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Cal could see lamplight glowing in the windows. He dismounted and knocked on the door. After a moment, Lila answered, her expression wary. "Sheriff Rowan, what brings you out here?" "I need to speak with your uncle." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "He's out back. I'll get him." Cal waited on the porch, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt out of habit. A few minutes later, Elias emerged from around the side of the house, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked tired, his shirt stained with dirt and sweat, but his eyes were sharp. "Sheriff," he said, "something I can help you with?" Cal got straight to the point. "I need to know about your brother." Elias went very still. For a long moment he didn't speak, and the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "I don't have a brother," Elias said finally. "You had one. His name was Samuel. He died 3 months ago in Arizona." Elias's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or regret. "If you already know the answer, why are you asking the question?" "Because I want to hear it from you." Elias sighed and looked out at the darkening horizon. "Samuel was my brother. We were close once, a long time ago. But he made bad choices, and I couldn't follow him down that road. We went our separate ways. I haven't seen him in over a decade. But you knew what he'd done. I knew he was an outlaw. I knew he'd killed men. I didn't know the details, and I didn't want to. I came here to start over, to build something clean, that's all." Cal studied him, trying to read the truth beneath the words. Samuel was part of a gang that robbed a payroll shipment 15 years ago, $30,000 in gold. 3 guards died. The gold was never recovered. Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "I wasn't part of that. I was already gone by then." "Maybe, but you know where the gold is." "I don't. You're lying." Elias's jaw tightened. "Believe what you want, Sheriff, but I'm telling you the truth. I don't know where that gold is, and even if I did, it wouldn't matter. That money's cursed. It destroyed my brother's life, and it'll destroy anyone else who goes looking for it." Cal took a step closer. "If you're clean, then prove it. Help me find the men who rode with Samuel. Help me finish this." "I can't help you. I don't know anything." "Or you won't help me because you're protecting someone." Elias's expression hardened. "Get off my land, Sheriff." "Not until you tell me the truth." Before Elias could respond, Lila appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Uncle, what's going on?" Elias didn't take his eyes off Cal. The sheriff was just leaving. Cal looked from Elias to Lila, then back again. He knew he was close to something, could feel it like a splinter buried deep, but pushing harder now would only make Elias shut down completely. "This isn't over," Cal said. "Yeah, it is," Elias replied. Cal turned and walked back to his horse. As he rode away, he glanced back once and saw Elias standing on the porch, watching him go. The man's face was unreadable, but Cal knew one thing for certain. Elias Ward was lying, and whatever secrets he was keeping, they were buried deep enough to kill for. The ride back to town was long and cold, and Cal's mind churned with questions that had no answers. He'd come to Red Hollow hunting the truth, but the deeper he dug, the more complicated it became. Elias wasn't the villain Cal had expected. He was something harder to define, a man caught between the past and the present, trying to protect something precious in a world that wanted to tear it apart. But that didn't change the facts. And if Elias was involved in that robbery, even indirectly, Cal would see justice done. When he reached Red Hollow, the town was quiet, the streets empty. Cal stabled his horse and walked toward the jailhouse, his boots echoing on the wooden boardwalk. As he reached for the door, a voice called out from the shadows. "Sheriff?" Cal turned to see a figure standing in the alley beside the jailhouse. It was a man he didn't recognize, thin, nervous, with the look of someone who'd spent too many nights sleeping rough. "Who are you?" Cal asked. "Name's Porter. I got information about Silas Vane." Cal's instincts prickled. "What kind of information?" Porter glanced around nervously. "Not here. Too many eyes. Meet me at the old mill north of town, midnight tomorrow. Come alone." "Why should I trust you?" Porter's laugh was bitter. "You shouldn't. But if you want to stop Vane, you'll come anyway." Before Cal could respond, Porter melted back into the shadows and was gone. Cal stood there for a long moment, weighing his options. It could be a trap. It probably was a trap. But if there was even a chance Porter had real information, Cal couldn't afford to ignore it. He went inside, locked the door, and sat at his desk, staring at the flickering lamp. The pieces were moving faster now, the game growing more dangerous with every passing day. Silas Vane on one side, Elias Ward on the other, and Cal caught in the middle, trying to untangle a web of lies and violence that went back 15 years. Tomorrow night, he'd meet Porter. And whatever happened next, Cal knew one thing for certain: Red Hollow was running out of time. The storm was coming, and when it broke, nothing would ever be the same. Cal spent the following day on edge, every instinct warning him that Porter's invitation was likely a setup. But necessity had a way of making men take risks they knew were foolish. And Cal needed information badly enough to walk into the trap, if that's what it took. He checked his weapons 3 times, loaded extra ammunition into his belt, and made sure Becker knew where he was going, though he told the deputy to stay put no matter what happened. "If I'm not back by sunrise," Cal said, "send word to the territorial marshal." Becker looked sick. "You're walking into an ambush." "Probably, but I'm walking in with my eyes open." The old mill sat 2 miles north of town, a crumbling structure of rotted timber and rusted machinery that hadn't turned a wheel in years. The creek that had once powered it had dried to a trickle, leaving behind mud and stones. Cal arrived just before midnight, his horse tied a quarter-mile back in a stand of cottonwoods. He approached on foot, moving silent through the darkness, every sense alert. The mill loomed against the starlit sky like a skeleton. Cal circled it once, looking for movement, listening for the telltale sounds of men waiting in ambush. The scrape of a boot, the click of a hammer being drawn back, the nervous breathing of someone trying to stay still. He heard nothing but the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. He slipped inside through a gap in the wall, his Colt drawn and ready. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange shadows across the debris-strewn floor. And there, standing near the old millstone, was Porter. The man looked even more haggard than he had the night before. His hand shook and his eyes darted constantly toward the darkness beyond the broken walls. "You came," Porter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You said you had information. Start talking." Porter licked his lips nervously. "You arrested Garrett. That was stupid. Silas, don't let nobody disrespect him like that. He's planning something big, something that'll end this range war once and for all." "What kind of something?" "A massacre. He's hiring gunmen from out of territory. Professional killers. They're coming in over the next few days. Once they're all here, Silas is going to hit the settler farms hard. Burn them out. Kill anyone who resists. Make it look like a range conflict gone bad, so the federal government won't step in." Cal's blood ran cold. "How many gunmen?" "Dozen, maybe more. Enough to wipe out every family between here and the foothills." "When?" "Soon. Maybe a week. Maybe less." Porter took a step closer, his eyes desperate. "You gotta stop him, Sheriff. If you don't, this whole valley's gonna run red." Cal studied the man carefully. "Why are you telling me this? What's in it for you?" Porter's face twisted with something like shame. "I used to work for Silas. Did things I ain't proud of. But there's lines even I won't cross. And murdering women and children is one of them. I'm done. I'm getting out. But I figured you deserved a warning, seeing as you're the only one with the guts to stand up to him." Before Cal could respond, the night exploded, Gunfire erupted from 3 directions, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like lightning. Bullets tore through the walls, splintering wood and ricocheting off metal. Cal dove behind the millstone as Porter screamed and fell, blood blooming across his chest. Cal fired back, his Colt barking in rapid succession. He caught a glimpse of movement near the door and put a round through it. A man cried out and stumbled into the moonlight, clutching his shoulder. 2 more shapes rushed the opposite wall, and Cal shifted his aim, squeezing off shots that forced them back into cover. His mind raced even as his hands worked with cold precision. This wasn't random. It was coordinated. Porter had been bait, and Cal had walked right into it. He reloaded in the brief lull, his fingers moving by muscle memory. Porter lay a few feet away, still breathing but fading fast. The man's eyes found Cal's, filled with pain and regret. "I'm sorry," Porter gasped. They made me. Said they'd kill my sister if I didn't." Then his eyes went vacant, and he was gone. Cal didn't have time to mourn. The attackers were regrouping, and he was pinned down with limited ammunition and no way out except through them. He counted at least 4, maybe 5. Professional work. Silas had sent his best. A voice called out from the darkness. "Give it up, Rowan. You're surrounded." Cal recognized that voice. Garrett. "Come and get me," Cal shouted back. "Don't have to. We can wait you out or we can burn you out. Either way, you're a dead man." Cal's mind raced, calculating angles and odds. The mill had multiple exits, but all of them were covered. If he tried to run, they'd cut him down before he made it 10 feet. If he stayed, they'd eventually rush him or set the place on fire. He needed a miracle. What he got was Elias Ward. The first sign was a rifle shot from outside the mill, sharp and precise. One of the shadowy figures near the door jerked and fell. Garrett shouted something, and suddenly the gunmen weren't focused on Cal anymore. They were returning fire toward the darkness beyond the mill. Cal didn't waste the opening. He burst from cover, firing as he moved, driving toward the gap in the wall he'd entered through. A man stepped into his path, raising a shotgun, and Cal put 2 rounds in his chest without breaking stride. He hit the ground outside and rolled, coming up behind a pile of old lumber just as bullets chewed into the wood where he'd been standing. And then he saw Elias, crouched behind a wagon 30 yards away, working his rifle like a man born to it. The farmer's movements were smooth and efficient, no wasted motion, every shot deliberate. Another of Garrett's men went down, and the rest scattered, looking for cover. Cal joined the fight, adding his pistol to Elias's rifle. Together they created a crossfire that turned the ambush inside out. Garrett realized too late that he was the one trapped now, caught between 2 shooters who knew exactly what they were doing. "Fall back!" Garrett roared, and the surviving gunmen broke and ran, disappearing into the night like ghosts. The sudden silence was deafening. Cal stayed behind cover, listening, making sure it wasn't a trick. When he was certain they were gone, he stood and walked toward Elias. The farmer lowered his rifle, his face grim. "You all right?" "Thanks to you. What are you doing here?" "Lila told me about your meeting, said she had a bad feeling about it. I decided to follow you just in case." Elias glanced at the mill, then back at Cal. "Looks like her instincts were right." Cal holstered his Colt, his heart still pounding. "You saved my life. Don't make more of it than it is. I don't like Silas Vane any more than you do. Enemy of my enemy and all that." Cal studied him in the moonlight. Elias Ward had just fought like a seasoned gunfighter, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of experience. There was no hesitation, no fumbling, just cold, lethal competence. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Cal asked. Elias's expression closed off. "Same place most men out here learn. Hard times and harder lessons." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Elias turned and started walking toward the trees where he'd left his horse. "We should get out of here before they come back with reinforcements." Cal followed, his mind churning. Elias had just confirmed every suspicion Cal had harbored. The man wasn't just a farmer. He was something else, something dangerous. And the way he'd handled that rifle suggested a past soaked in violence. They rode back toward Red Hollow in silence, the night air cool and sharp. When they reached the edge of town, Elias pulled up. "I'll leave you here. Don't want folks seeing us together. Bad enough Silas knows I shot at his men. He'll come after you for this. Let him try." Elias's voice was hard as iron. "I'm done running. I've built a life here. and I'm not letting Silas Vane or anyone else take it from me. Cal wanted to press him, wanted to demand answers about Samuel Ward and the stolen gold and all the secrets buried in Elias's past. But the man had just saved his life, and there were bigger problems looming. Porter told me Silas is hiring gunmen, Cal said, planning a massacre. He's going to wipe out the settler farms. Elias's jaw tightened. When? Soon. Maybe a week. Then we don't have much time. Elias looked out at the dark valley, his expression unreadable. You can't stop this alone, Sheriff. You're going to need help. I know, but who's going to stand with me? Half this town's too scared to breathe, and the other half works for Silas. The settlers will stand with you, if you give them a reason to believe. And you? Elias was quiet for a long moment. I'll do what needs doing. But understand something, Rowan. Whatever you think you know about me, whatever you're hunting, it ends after this. You help me protect these people and I'll tell you everything. Deal? Cal considered it. It wasn't the arrest he'd come for, but it was something. And right now, stopping a massacre mattered more than settling old scores. Deal, he said. Elias nodded and turned his horse toward home. Watch your back, Sheriff. Silas knows you're dangerous now. He won't stop until you're dead. Cal watched him ride away, then turned his horse toward town. The ambush had changed everything. Silas had shown his hand, and now Cal knew just how far the man was willing to go. This wasn't about cattle or land anymore. It was about power, and the kind of men who'd kill to keep it. When Cal reached the jailhouse, Becker was waiting, pale and anxious. I heard shooting. What happened? Ambush. They tried to kill me. Who? Garrett and some of Silas's hired guns. Porter was bait. He's dead. Becker sank into a chair, his hands shaking. This is bad. Real bad. Silas just declared war on you. He declared war on this whole town, and we're going to answer it. Over the next 2 days, Cal worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He rode from farm to farm, meeting with the settlers, telling them what was coming and what they needed to do. Some were ready to fight. Others wanted to pack up and run. Cal didn't blame either group, but he made his case with everything he had. Silas Vane thinks he can scare you off your land, he told a gathering of farmers in a barn outside town. He thinks if he burns enough barns and kills enough people, you'll break. But here's what he doesn't understand. This is your home. You've bled for it. You've built it with your own hands. And if you run now, he wins. Not just here, but everywhere. Because men like Silas only understand one language, and that's force. You want him to stop? You have to make him stop. A man in the back called out, How? We're farmers, not gunfighters. You don't have to be gunfighters. You just have to be willing to stand together, protect each other, make it too costly for Silas to keep pushing. He's got guns, but so do you. He's got numbers, but you've got something he doesn't. You've got a reason to fight that's bigger than money. Another voice, this one belonging to a woman with steel in her eyes. And what happens when we do stand? What's to stop Silas from bringing in more men, more guns? He's got deep pockets. Nothing stops him from trying, Cal admitted. But every man he hires is another witness, another piece of evidence. The territorial government's been ignoring this valley because they thought it was just a local squabble. But if Silas escalates to open war, they'll have to step in. And when they do, he's done. The woman nodded slowly. So we make enough noise that they can't ignore us anymore. Exactly. By the end of the second day, Cal had commitments from 24 families. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. They agreed to set up watch rotations, share information, and ride to each other's aid if trouble came calling. It was fragile, built on hope and desperation, but it was something. Cal also sent word to the territorial capital, detailing everything that had happened and formally requesting federal intervention. He knew the wheels of government turned slowly, but it was a necessary step. If things went as badly as he feared, there needed to be a record of what had led to it. On the third night, Lila Ward appeared at the jailhouse again. This time she looked exhausted, her hair disheveled and her dress dusty from hard riding. Sheriff, I need your help. Someone tried to burn our barn last night. We managed to put it out, but they'll try again. My uncle's watching the farm alone, and he can't hold off an attack by himself. Cal grabbed his rifle without hesitation. How many were there? We didn't see them. Just smelled the smoke and found the fire before it spread. But there were hoof prints, at least 3 riders. Probably scouts, testing your defenses. Cal loaded his saddlebags with ammunition and supplies. I'll ride back with you. They made the journey in hard silence, the horses pushed to a steady lope. When they arrived at the Ward farm, Cal found Elias on the porch, his rifle across his knees and his eyes scanning the darkness. Trouble? Elias asked. Could be. Lila said someone tried to burn the barn. They did. Got it started in the back corner where we wouldn't see it right away. If Lila hadn't been up checking on the mare, we'd have lost everything. Cal dismounted and walked the perimeter, studying the ground by lantern light. The tracks told a clear story. 3 riders had approached from the north, set the fire, and retreated the same way. Professional work, meant to destroy property without direct confrontation. They'll be back, Cal said, probably with more men next time. Elias nodded. I know. That's why I'm sending Lila into town tomorrow. She'll be safer there. Uncle, I'm not leaving you here alone, Lila protested. Yes, you are. This isn't a discussion. Elias's tone left no room for argument. If something happens to me, I need to know you're safe. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue further. She turned and walked into the house, her shoulders tight with frustration and fear. Elias watched her go, then turned to Cal. I meant what I said before. After this is done, I'll tell you everything. But right now, I need to know you're committed to stopping Silas. Not just arresting him, stopping him. Whatever it takes. I'm committed. Good. Because what's coming isn't going to be clean or legal. It's going to be bloody. And men like you and me, we're going to have to do things that'll haunt us. Cal met his gaze steadily. I've done things that haunt me before. I'll live with more if it means saving innocent lives. Elias nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Then we understand each other. They spent the night taking turns on watch, 2 men bound together by necessity and shared danger. As the hours passed, Cal found himself thinking about the choices that had led him here. He'd come to Red Hollow hunting justice for a 15-year-old crime, driven by a need to close a case that had defined his career. But somewhere along the way, the mission had changed. It wasn't just about the gold anymore, or even about Samuel Ward. It was about the people of this valley, people like Lila, who deserved a future without fear, and even Elias, who was trying to outrun a past that wouldn't let him go. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. Lila packed a small bag and prepared to leave for town, her face pale but resolute. Before she mounted her horse, she turned to Cal. Keep him safe, she said quietly. He's all I have left. I'll do my best. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she just nodded and rode away, her figure growing smaller against the vast expanse of the valley. Cal and Elias watched her go, then turned their attention to preparing the farm for the fight that was coming. They reinforced the barn doors, set up firing positions with clear sight lines, and cached ammunition in strategic locations. It was grim work, turning a home into a fortress, but both men knew it was necessary. As they worked, Elias finally broke the silence that had stretched between them. You want to know about Samuel? It wasn't a question. Cal stopped what he was doing and straightened. Yeah, I do. Elias set down the hammer he'd been using and leaned against the barn wall. Samuel was my older brother. We grew up rough, no parents, no money, just each other. He took care of me when we were kids, made sure I ate, kept me out of trouble. I looked up to him. Thought he was the strongest, smartest man in the world. He paused, his eyes distant. But Samuel had a darkness in him, an anger that never went away. When we got older, he started running with bad men, outlaws. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. Said the world owed us for the way we'd been treated, and he was going to take what was his. The Amarillo robbery, Cal said. Yeah, I didn't know about it beforehand, swear on my life. But after it happened, Samuel came to me, told me what he'd done, said he had enough money to set us both up for life, and all I had to do was keep quiet and take my share. What did you do? Elias's voice was heavy with old pain. I told him to turn himself in, said the money was blood money, and I wanted no part of it. We fought, worst fight we ever had. I told him I was done, that I couldn't be his brother anymore if he stayed on that path. And then I left, changed my name, moved west, started over. I haven't seen him since. But you knew he was still out there, still alive. I heard rumors over the years that he was running with new partners, that he was getting more dangerous. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore, that I'd made my choice and he'd made his. Elias's jaw tightened. And then I heard he was dead. Part of me was relieved. Part of me felt like I'd failed him. Cal absorbed this, weighing every word. The gold. Do you know where it is? No, and that's the truth. Samuel never told me, and I never asked. What about his partners? The men he rode with after the robbery? Elias hesitated, and Cal knew he was close to something important. He mentioned 2 names once in a letter he sent me a few years back. I burned the letter, but I remember the names. Crenshaw and Durst. I don't know if they're still alive or where they are. But if anyone knows about that gold, it'd be them. Cal felt something click into place in his mind. Crenshaw and Durst. 2 names he'd been chasing for years, always one step behind. And now, finally, he had confirmation they existed. Thank you, Cal said. Elias pushed off the wall. That's all I know, Rowan. Everything else is just ghosts and old pain. Now can we focus on keeping the living alive? Yeah, we can do that. They finished their preparations in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. As the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm, Cal found himself wondering if he'd been wrong about Elias all along. The man wasn't a villain. He was just someone trying to survive the weight of a brother's sins, same as anyone else born into hard circumstances. But the truth didn't change the danger they were facing. Somewhere out there, Silas Vane was gathering his forces, preparing for the strike that would end the range war once and for all. And when that strike came, Cal and Elias would have to be ready, because Red Hollow was running out of time, and the storm was about to break. The storm broke 3 days later, just before dawn, when the world was still caught between darkness and light. Cal was asleep in his Ward farmhouse, his rifle propped against the wall beside the chair he'd claimed as a makeshift bed. The sound that woke him wasn't loud, just the soft creak of a floorboard that shouldn't have creaked. His eyes snapped open, and his hand found the rifle in one smooth motion. Elias was already at the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. "We've got company," he said quietly. "At least a dozen riders, maybe more." Cal moved to the opposite window and looked out. In the pale pre-dawn light, he could see shapes moving across the fields, spreading out in a wide arc. They were trying to surround the house, cutting off any escape. Professional tactics. Silas had sent his hired killers, and they'd come to finish what the ambush at the mill had started. "How long do we have?" Cal asked. 5 minutes, maybe less. Elias's voice was calm, but Cal could hear the edge beneath it. "They'll want to get in position before full light." Cal checked his ammunition. He had his rifle, his Colt, and maybe 40 rounds total. Not nearly enough for a prolonged fight against a dozen men. "We need to break their formation before they can pin us down." Elias nodded. "I'll take the barn. You hold the house. We create a crossfire. Make them think there's more of us than there are. That barn's not going to provide much cover." "It'll do." Elias grabbed his rifle and a satchel of ammunition. "Just make sure you keep them busy enough that they don't focus on me." Before Cal could argue, Elias was out the back door, moving low and fast across the yard. Cal watched him disappear into the barn, then turned his attention back to the approaching riders. They were closer now, close enough that he could make out individual shapes. Some were dismounting, taking positions behind whatever cover they could find. A water trough, a fence post, a pile of old timber. Cal recognized Garrett among them, his massive frame unmistakable even in the dim light. The man was directing the others, pointing and gesturing, orchestrating the attack like a conductor leading an orchestra of violence. Cal waited, forcing himself to be patient. The first shot mattered. It would set the tone for everything that followed. He needed to make it count. One of the gunmen broke from cover, running toward the house with a torch in his hand. He was planning to set the building on fire, trap Cal inside, and burn him out. Cal tracked him through the rifle sights, led him just slightly, and squeezed the trigger. The gunman went down hard, the torch tumbling from his hand and guttering out in the dirt. Before the echo of the shot had faded, Elias opened up from the barn, his rifle cracking in steady, measured shots. 2 more men fell, and suddenly the coordinated attack dissolved into chaos. The gunmen scattered, looking for cover, returning fire wildly. Bullets tore through the farmhouse walls, shattering glass and splintering wood. Cal moved from window to window, firing and repositioning, never staying in one place long enough to give them a target. He could hear Elias doing the same in the barn, the steady rhythm of his rifle like a drumbeat of defiance. Garrett's voice roared over the gunfire. "Concentrate fire on the house! Burn them out!" 3 men rushed forward with torches, and Cal dropped 2 of them before they got within throwing distance. The third made it close enough to hurl his torch onto the porch, but Elias put a bullet through him before he could retreat. The torch caught on the dry wood, and flames began to lick up the wall. Cal cursed and ran to the back of the house, grabbing a bucket of water they'd set aside for this exact situation. He doused the flames, choking on smoke, then returned to the window and kept firing. His shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, and his ears rang from the constant barrage of noise. But he didn't stop. The battle settled into a brutal rhythm. The gunmen would advance, Cal and Elias would drive them back, and then there would be a lull while both sides regrouped. Bodies littered the yard now, some moving, some not. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung thick in the air, but Cal could feel the tide turning against them. They were running low on ammunition, and the gunmen were learning from their mistakes, advancing more carefully, using better cover. It was only a matter of time before they were overrun. Then, from the direction of the road, Cal heard something that changed everything: the thunder of hoofbeats and the shouts of men. He risked a glance and saw riders pouring over the rise, farmers from the surrounding homesteads, armed with rifles and shotguns, their faces set with grim determination. They'd come. The settlers had actually come. They hit Garrett's men from the flank, firing from horseback, then dismounting and taking cover. The hired guns found themselves caught in a 3-way crossfire, and their carefully planned assault fell apart completely. Some tried to fight, some tried to run, and some just threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Garrett, seeing the battle lost, spurred his horse and fled toward the hills with 3 of his men following. Cal wanted to chase him, wanted to finish this, but there were still enemies in the yard who needed dealing with. The fight lasted another 10 minutes before it was over. When the last shot had been fired and the smoke began to clear, Cal stepped out of the farmhouse to survey the aftermath. 6 of Silas's men lay dead. 4 more were wounded and disarmed. The rest had escaped with Garrett. Elias emerged from the barn, his face blackened with powder smoke, his shirt torn and bloodied from a graze across his ribs. He looked exhausted but alive. One of the farmers, a man named Hutchins, rode up and dismounted. "We heard the shooting. Figured you could use some help." Cal gripped his hand. "You figured right, thank you." Hutchins looked at the bodies scattered across the yard and shook his head. "This is bad, Sheriff. Real bad. Silas is going to come at us with everything he's got now." "I know. But you just proved something important. You proved you can stand together. You proved you can fight." Another settler, a woman named Sarah Donovan, stepped forward. Her dress was spattered with mud, and she held a rifle like she knew how to use it. "What do we do now? Silas won't stop. He'll bring more men, more guns." "We dig in," Cal said. "We fortify the farms, set up watches, ride in groups. We make it clear that attacking one of us means attacking all of us, and we hold until federal help arrives." "You really think help's coming?" Hutchins asked skeptically. "It has to. I sent word to the territorial capital. They can't ignore this anymore, not after what just happened here." Elias spoke up, his voice rough. "He's right. Silas just committed murder and arson with hired killers. That's federal jurisdiction, but we need to survive long enough for the law to catch up." The settlers murmured among themselves, weighing their options. Cal could see the fear in their eyes, but he could also see something else: resolve. These were people who'd built lives in a hard land. They weren't going to give up without a fight. "We're with you, Sheriff," Sarah Donovan said finally. "Whatever it takes." The others nodded their agreement, and Cal felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't much, this ragged alliance of desperate people, but it was real. And sometimes real was enough. They spent the rest of the morning dealing with the aftermath. The dead were loaded onto wagons to be taken into town. The wounded were patched up as best they could manage with the limited supplies on hand. Cal questioned the prisoners, but none of them would talk. They were too scared of Silas, even in defeat. As the settlers prepared to return to their own farms, Elias pulled Cal aside. "This isn't over. Silas is going to retaliate, and when he does, it's going to be worse than this." "I know. You need to understand something. Elias's expression was grave. That gold you've been hunting, the one from the Amarillo robbery, it's here, in Red Hollow. Cal went very still. What? Samuel told me right before he died. He sent a letter, said he'd buried it years ago, wanted me to know where in case something happened to him. Said it was my inheritance, whether I wanted it or not. Where is it? On Silas Vane's land. That's why Silas has been so obsessed with driving out the settlers. One of them built a farm on a piece of property that's right next to where Samuel buried the gold. If the federal ruling goes through and the land gets parceled out to homesteaders, Silas loses access to it. Cal's mind raced, pieces clicking together. He knows about the gold. He must. Samuel had partners, Crenshaw and Durst. I'd bet anything one of them is working with Silas, probably told him where the gold was buried in exchange for a cut. So this whole range war, it's not about cattle or water rights. It's about $30,000 in stolen gold. Elias nodded, and Silas will kill anyone who gets between him and that money. That's why he's so desperate. That's why he's willing to start a war. Cal felt a cold fury building in his chest. All of this, the fear, the violence, the deaths, it was all because of greed. Silas Vane had wrapped his ambition in the language of range rights and tradition, but underneath it was just a man willing to murder for gold that wasn't even his. We need to find that gold, Cal said. Use it as evidence against Silas. It's not that simple. The burial site is on the Broken V. You can't just walk onto his property and start digging without him knowing. Then we make him show us where it is. Elias raised an eyebrow. How? Cal's mind was already working through the angles, formulating a plan that was dangerous and probably reckless, but might be their only chance. We force his hand, make him think we already know where the gold is, make him desperate enough to go after it himself. And when he does, we follow him. That's a hell of a gamble. You got a better idea? Elias was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. No. But if we're going to do this, we need to move fast. Silas is going to strike again, probably within the next couple of days. We need to find that gold and get it into federal hands before this valley tears itself apart. Cal agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning, working out the details of a scheme that depended on timing, luck, and Silas Vane being exactly as greedy as they thought he was. It was a long shot, but it was the best chance they had. As evening fell, Cal rode back into Red Hollow. The town was on edge, word of the battle at the Ward farm having spread like wildfire. People whispered in doorways and watched him pass with expressions that mixed hope and terror. Cal went straight to the jailhouse and found Becker waiting, his face pale. Lila Ward told me what happened. Said you and her uncle fought off a dozen gunmen. We had help. The settlers came through. Becker slumped in relief. Thank the heavens. I thought for sure you were dead. Not yet, but the fight's not over. Silas is going to come back harder. We need to be ready. What do you need from me? Spread the word. I want everyone in town to know that I found evidence linking Silas Vane to the Amarillo robbery from 15 years ago. Tell them I've got a witness who knows where the stolen gold is buried, and I'm planning to dig it up tomorrow at dawn. Becker blinked. Is that true? Doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is that Silas believes it. If he thinks I'm about to take his gold, he'll have to act. Understanding dawned on Becker's face. You're setting a trap. That's right. And if it works, we'll have all the evidence we need to bury Silas Vane for good. Becker nodded slowly. I'll get the word out. But Sheriff, if this goes wrong, we're no worse off than we are now. And if it goes right, we end this war before any more people die. Becker left to spread the rumor, and Cal sat alone in the jailhouse, the weight of what he was planning settling over him like a shroud. He was gambling with lives, his own, Elias's, and everyone who'd stood with them at the Ward farm. But sometimes gambling was all you had left. The night crawled past, every hour feeling like 10. Cal dozed fitfully in his chair, his hand never far from his gun. Around midnight, he heard footsteps on the boardwalk outside and tensed, but it was only Lila Ward, her face drawn with worry. I heard what you're planning, she said without preamble, using the gold as bait. Your uncle told you. He tells me everything. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. This is dangerous, Sheriff. If Silas figures out it's a trap, he'll kill you both. I know, but we're out of options. If we don't stop him now, he's going to burn this valley to the ground. Lila was quiet for a moment. My uncle thinks the world of you, you know. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. He hasn't trusted anyone in a long time, but he trusts you. Cal felt something twist in his chest. I'm not sure I deserve that trust. I came here hunting your uncle, thinking he was a criminal. Were you wrong? About him being a criminal? Yeah. About him having secrets? No. Cal met her gaze. But I've learned that carrying someone else's sins doesn't make you guilty. Your uncle's a good man trying to do right by the people he cares about. That's more than most people can say. Lila's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Promise me you'll bring him back alive. I'll do everything I can. She nodded, then turned and left without another word. Cal watched her go, then stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, quiet town. Somewhere out there, Silas Vane was planning his next move, and before the sun rose again, they'd be locked in a fight that would decide the fate of Red Hollow once and for all. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky painted in shades of pale gold and lavender. Cal met Elias at the edge of town, both men armed and ready. They rode north toward the Broken V, moving at a steady pace, alert for any sign of ambush. You think he'll take the bait? Elias asked. He'll take it. A man like Silas can't stand the thought of losing something he thinks belongs to him. He'll come. They reached a small canyon about 2 miles from the Broken V's main house, a place Elias had scouted the day before. It was good defensive ground, with high walls and limited approaches. If Silas came with his men, Cal and Elias would have the advantage of position. They took up positions behind a tumble of boulders and waited. The sun climbed higher, turning the air warm and still. An hour passed. Then 2. Cal was beginning to think the plan had failed when he heard the sound of horses approaching. Silas Vane rode into the canyon with a dozen men, Garrett among them. They were heavily armed, their faces hard and cold. Silas pulled up his horse and looked around, his eyes scanning the rocks. Sheriff Rowan, he called out. I know you're here. Let's talk like civilized men. Cal stood up, rifle in hand but not aimed. Talk about what, Silas? About how you've been trying to murder me, or about the gold you're so desperate to keep hidden? Silas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. The Amarillo robbery. 30,000 in gold, buried somewhere on your land. You've been killing people to keep it secret, but the secret's out now. I know where it is, and so do the federal marshals. They're on their way here right now. That last part was a lie, but Silas didn't know that. Cal watched the man's face, saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. You're bluffing, Silas said finally. Maybe. Or maybe I've already dug it up and sent it to the territorial capital as evidence. Only one way to find out. Silas's jaw tightened. He turned to Garrett and said something too low for Cal to hear. Garrett nodded and gestured to the men, and they began to spread out, moving to flank Cal's position. That's how you want to play it? Cal called out. Fine, but you should know, you're not the only one with backup. As if on cue, Elias stood up from his own position 50 yards away, his rifle trained on Silas. And then from the rocks around the canyon, more figures appeared, farmers and settlers, all armed, all ready. Silas's face went pale. He'd walked into a trap, and he knew it. It's over, Silas, Cal said. Drop your weapons and surrender. You'll get a fair trial. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Silas smiled, a cold, terrible smile that held no warmth at all. A fair trial, he repeated. You really think that matters? I own the judges, Rowan. I own the politicians. Even if you drag me to court, I'll walk free. Men like me always do. Maybe, Cal said, but you're going to have to explain to those judges why you started a war over stolen gold. You're going to have to explain the bodies, the burned farms, the hired killers, and all of it's going to be on record for everyone to see. You might buy your way out of a noose, Silas, but you'll never buy back your reputation. Silas's smile faded. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just another fool who doesn't understand how the world works. I understand just fine. I understand that you're finished. Silas's hand moved toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Garrett and his men drew their weapons, the settlers opened fire, and the canyon exploded into chaos. Cal dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him, the sound deafening. He returned fire, his rifle bucking against his shoulder, and saw one of Silas's men go down. Beside him, Elias was working his own rifle with deadly precision, dropping targets with every shot. The settlers held their ground, pouring fire into the gunmen below. Silas's men broke, some trying to fight, others running for their horses. Garrett stayed in the saddle, firing wildly, but a bullet from Elias's rifle took his horse out from under him. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Silas himself spurred his horse toward the canyon mouth, trying to escape. Cal tracked him, led him, and fired. The bullet caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him half out of the saddle. He managed to stay mounted and kept riding, disappearing around a bend. "I'm going after him," Cal shouted to Elias. "Go, we'll handle the rest." Cal ran to his horse and swung into the saddle, kicking the animal into a gallop. He chased Silas out of the canyon and across the open range, the two riders pushing their horses to the limit. Silas was wounded and losing blood, but he rode like a man possessed, heading toward the broken V. They reached the ranch, and Silas dismounted near the main house, stumbling toward the door. Cal was right behind him, his Colt drawn. "It's over, Silas. Stop!" Silas turned, his face twisted with rage and pain. He had a pistol in his hand, and he raised it toward Cal. Cal fired first. The bullet took Silas in the chest, and the big man staggered back, his gun falling from his hand. He collapsed against the porch railing, sliding down to sit in the dust. Cal approached cautiously, his weapon still trained on Silas. The rancher's breathing was labored, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. He looked up at Cal with eyes that held no fear, only bitter defiance. "You didn't win," Silas gasped. "The gold's still out there. Someone else will find it." "Maybe, but it won't be you." Silas laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Doesn't matter. Men like me, we always win, one way or another." Then his eyes went glassy, and he was gone. Cal stood there for a long moment, looking down at the body of the man who'd terrorized an entire valley. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of victory, just exhaustion and the weight of all the violence that had led to this moment. He heard horses approaching and turned to see Elias and several of the settlers riding up. Elias dismounted and walked over, taking in the scene. "He's dead," Cal said. Elias nodded. "Good. The world's better off." They stood together in silence, two men who'd fought a war they'd never wanted, united by necessity and loss. "What happens now?" Elias asked. Cal holstered his Colt. "Now we find that gold. Turn it over to the federal authorities. Let them sort out what it means. And then? And then we try to put this valley back together." The search for the gold began that same afternoon, while the bodies were still being gathered from the canyon and the stunned survivors of Silas's hired army were being locked in the Red Hollow jail. Elias led Cal to the eastern edge of the broken V, where the ranch land bordered what had become settler territory after the land grants were issued. The spot was marked by a lightning-scarred pine that stood alone on a small rise, visible for miles in every direction. "Samuel described it in his letter," Elias said, dismounting. "Said he buried it 30 paces due north of this tree, 6 feet down. Figured nobody would look for stolen gold on open rangeland where anybody could stumble across it. Except Silas did stumble across it, or someone told him. Crenshaw or Durst, most likely. One of them must have cut a deal with Silas, traded the location for protection or a cut of the money. They retrieved shovels from a nearby homestead, a family named Morrison who'd been among the first to stand with Cal at the Ward farm. The Morrisons watched silently as Cal and Elias began to dig, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Word had spread fast about Silas's death and the battle in the canyon, and people were still trying to understand what it all meant. The digging was hard work, made harder by the rocky soil in the afternoon heat. Cal and Elias took turns, one digging while the other kept watch. Cal half expected Silas's remaining men to show up and try to claim the gold for themselves, but the ranch had gone eerily quiet after their boss's death. Most of the cowhands had scattered, unwilling to die for a dead man's greed. They'd been digging for nearly 2 hours when Cal's shovel hit something solid. He dropped to his knees and brushed away the dirt, revealing the corner of a metal strongbox. His pulse quickened despite himself. 15 years he'd been chasing this ghost, and now here it was, buried in the earth like a curse waiting to be unearthed. Together, they hauled the box out of the ground. It was heavy, reinforced with iron bands, and sealed with a rusted padlock. Cal broke the lock with the back of his shovel, then opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly rotted away, were neat stacks of gold coins. Even tarnished and dirty, they gleamed in the sunlight. $30,000 in stolen gold, the prize that had cost so many lives and torn apart so many families. Elias stared at it, his expression unreadable. All this suffering, all this death, for metal. Cal reached out and picked up one of the coins, turning it over in his fingers. It was heavy and cold, and it felt like holding a piece of concentrated misery. Money's never just money. It's what people are willing to do to get it that makes it worth something, or worth nothing. What happens to it now? It goes to the territorial authorities, evidence in a federal case. After that, who knows? Maybe it gets returned to whoever it was stolen from, if they're still around. Maybe it gets absorbed into government coffers. Doesn't really matter. It mattered to Samuel. It mattered enough that he threw away everything good in his life to chase it. Cal closed the strongbox and stood, brushing dirt from his hands. Your brother made his choices. You made yours. The difference is you're still standing here, and he's not. That tells me something about which choice was right. Elias looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Let's get this out of here before somebody gets the wrong idea. They loaded the strongbox onto Cal's horse and rode back toward Red Hollow, the Morrison family following at a respectful distance. By the time they reached town, word had spread even further, and a crowd had gathered in the street. People lined the boardwalks, whispering and pointing, their faces showing everything from relief to residual fear to simple bone-deep exhaustion. Cal took the gold directly to the jailhouse and locked it in the safe, then posted Becker as a guard with strict instructions to let no one near it. The deputy looked terrified by the responsibility, but he nodded and took up his position with a shotgun across his knees. As Cal stepped back outside, he found Lila waiting for him. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed, but there was something else there too, a lightness that hadn't been present before. Is it true? She asked. Silas is dead? The fighting's over? It's true. She closed her eyes and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. Thank heaven. I thought it would never end. Where's your uncle? At the doctor's. He took a bullet graze during the fight at the canyon. Nothing serious, but it needed stitching. She looked up at Cal, and there were tears on her cheeks now. You saved us, Sheriff. You saved all of us. Cal shook his head. Your uncle saved himself. And all those farmers who came when I called, they're the ones who made the difference. I just pointed them in the right direction. Don't be modest. You gave people hope when they had none left. That's worth more than you know. Before Cal could respond, a commotion at the edge of town drew his attention. A group of riders was approaching, not locals by the look of them. They rode in tight formation, and the leader wore a badge that caught the sunlight. Federal marshals. Cal walked out to meet them, and the lead marshal dismounted. He was a hard-faced man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by much of anything. You Sheriff Rowan? That's right. Marshal Hendricks, out of the territorial capital. We got your message about the situation here. Looks like we're a day late. Cal gave him a brief rundown of everything that had happened. The range war, Silas's death, the discovery of the stolen gold. Hendricks listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively grimmer. Well, he said when Cal finished, you've made one hell of a mess, Sheriff, but from what I'm hearing, it was a mess that needed making. We'll need statements from everyone involved, and I'll have to take custody of that gold as federal evidence. It's in the jailhouse safe. I'll turn it over to you directly. Good. We'll also need to sort out the land situation. With Silas Vane dead, the broken V reverts to probate. That means the territorial government gets to decide what happens to it. The settlers have legal deeds to their land. Those need to be honored. They will be, but there's a lot of acreage in dispute, and it's going to take time to sort through it all. Hendricks looked around at the gathered crowd. In the meantime, this town needs law and order. You planning to stick around, Sheriff? Cal hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd come to Red Hollow chasing a ghost, and that ghost had led him through violence and revelation to this moment. The question was, what came next? I don't know, he said honestly. I took this job for the wrong reasons. Not sure I deserve to keep it now that the truth's out. The truth being? That I was more interested in closing an old case than in protecting the people of this town. Hendricks studied him. Maybe you started out that way. But from what I've seen and heard, you did the job when it mattered. That's more than most men can say. The offer stands. Red Hollow needs a sheriff, and you've already got the badge. I'll think about it. Fair enough. Now let's get that gold secured before somebody gets ideas. Over the next few days, Red Hollow slowly began to breathe again. The federal marshals conducted their investigation, taking statements and documenting the evidence. The prisoners from Silas's gang were transported to the territorial capital to face trial. The bodies were buried, and families began the long process of grieving and healing. Cal found himself in a strange position. He was a hero to some, the man who'd stood up to tyranny and won. To others, he was an outsider who'd brought violence to their doorstep. And to himself, he was just a man trying to figure out what he believed in and what he wanted his life to mean. He spent a lot of time with Elias during those days, helping repair the damage to the Ward farm and talking through everything that had happened. The two men had developed an unlikely friendship, born from shared danger and mutual respect. Elias never brought up the fact that Cal had come to Red Hollow suspecting him of crimes, and Cal never brought up the fact that Elias had withheld the truth about Samuel and the gold. Some things were better left unspoken. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Elias finally broke the comfortable silence between them. "I'm leaving," he said quietly. Cal looked at him in surprise. "What? Why?" "Because this place will never let me forget what Samuel did. Every time someone looks at me, they'll see his brother, the man connected to the robbery that started all this bloodshed. I can't build a life here with that hanging over me. People will forget. Give it time. Maybe, but I won't forget. And neither will Lila." Elias turned to face Cal. "She deserves better than to be known as the niece of an outlaw's brother. She deserves a fresh start, somewhere clean." "Where will you go?" "West, California maybe, or north to Oregon, somewhere far enough away that the name Ward doesn't carry weight." He paused. "I wanted to thank you before I left, for believing me when it mattered, for seeing me as more than just Samuel's brother." Cal felt something tighten in his chest. "You're a good man, Elias. Don't let anyone tell you different. I'm a man who made mistakes and tried to outrun them. That's not the same as being good, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do." They shook hands, and in that moment, Cal understood that this was goodbye. Elias Ward would disappear into the vast American frontier, taking his secrets and his pain with him, and Red Hollow would become just another chapter in a long and complicated story. The next morning, Cal watched as Elias and Lila loaded their wagon and prepared to leave. A small group of settlers had gathered to see them off, people whose lives Elias had helped save. There were no speeches, no grand declarations, just quiet nods of respect and murmured wishes for safe travels. Lila approached Cal last, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I wish you were coming with us. This is your journey, you and your uncle. You don't need me for it." "Maybe not, but I'll miss you anyway." She reached up and kissed his cheek, then climbed onto the wagon beside Elias. Elias took up the reins and looked down at Cal. "Keep the badge, Sheriff. This town needs you more than you know." "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. Some opportunities don't come twice." Then they were gone, the wagon rolling down the dusty road and out of sight, carrying with them the last living connection to Samuel Ward and the robbery that had defined Cal's career for 15 years. Cal stood in the street for a long time after they disappeared, feeling the weight of their absence. He'd gotten his answers, he'd closed his case, he'd even recovered the gold. But somehow none of it felt like victory. It just felt like endings. Marshal Hendricks found him there an hour later, still standing in the same spot. "You look like a man at a crossroads." "I suppose I am." "The Ward family, they left?" "This morning." "Can't say I blame them. This valley's soaked in bad memories for them." Hendricks pulled out a cigar and lit it, taking a long draw. "For what it's worth, I think they were good people caught in bad circumstances. The brothers' sins aren't theirs to carry." "I know." "Do you? Because you still look like you're carrying something heavy." Cal turned to face the marshal. "I spent 15 years hunting Samuel Ward. 15 years convinced that catching him would somehow make everything right, would bring justice for those dead guards and their families. But now he's dead, his brother's gone, and all I've got to show for it is a box of gold that doesn't belong to me, and a town that's still trying to figure out how to live without fear. That's more than most lawmen ever accomplish. Is it? Because it doesn't feel like enough. Hendricks studied him through a haze of cigar smoke. Let me tell you something I learned a long time ago, Rowan. Justice isn't about catching every criminal or solving every case. It's about standing up when it matters, even when the odds are against you. You did that here. You stood between innocent people and men who wanted to destroy them, and you didn't back down. That's what wearing a badge means. Not perfect victories, just being willing to fight when nobody else will. Cal let those words settle over him, testing them against his own doubts. You really think Red Hollow needs me? I think Red Hollow needs someone who'll fight for it. Whether that's you or somebody else, I can't say. But I can tell you this. You've already proven you're willing to do the job. Most men can't say that. Hendricks left him then, and Cal walked back to the jailhouse. He sat at the desk, looking at the badge pinned to his chest, thinking about everything it represented. For so long, he'd worn it as a tool, a means to an end in his hunt for Samuel Ward. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else. It had become a promise to people like Lila and Elias and all those frightened farmers who'd found the courage to stand together. The question was, could he make that promise mean something? That night, Cal made his decision. He would stay. Not because he'd found what he was looking for, but because he'd learned that what he was looking for had been the wrong thing all along. Justice wasn't a box of gold or a closed case file. It was the slow, hard work of building something better in the ruins of what came before. The weeks that followed brought changes to Red Hollow. The federal ruling on the land dispute came down, and it split the territory fairly between ranching and farming interests. The Broken V was broken up and sold, with portions going to existing settlers and portions being opened to new homesteaders. The money from the sale went into a fund for improving the town, building a proper courthouse, hiring a second deputy, establishing a school. The survivors of Silas's gang were tried in the territorial capital, and most of them were sentenced to hard labor in the territorial prison. Garrett, who'd survived his injuries from the Canyon battle, was given 20 years. He went to prison cursing Cal's name, but Cal slept fine regardless. The gold from the Amarillo robbery was officially returned to the railroad company that had owned the payroll, and they posted a notice in the territorial newspaper thanking Sheriff Cal Rowan for his dedication and service. Cal kept the clipping, not out of pride, but as a reminder of how complicated justice could be. Red Hollow itself changed slowly, the way all wounded places change. The fear that had poisoned it for so long began to lift, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Families stopped walking on eggshells. Children played in the streets again. The saloons started hosting Saturday night dances, and people actually smiled. Cal became a fixture in the town, respected if not entirely trusted. He was still an outsider in many ways, but he was their outsider, the man who'd stood with them when it mattered. He hired a young man named Thomas as his deputy, trained him properly, and began to build the kind of law enforcement the town deserved. He also started receiving letters from Lila. She and Elias had settled in Northern California near the Oregon border. They'd bought a small ranch and were building a new life. Her letters were full of small details about the weather, about the work, about the neighbors they were getting to know. But between the lines, Cal could read the real message. They were healing. They were finding peace. He wrote back, keeping his own letters brief and practical, giving her updates about Red Hollow and the changes happening in the valley. He didn't say what he was really thinking, that he missed their conversations, that the town felt emptier without them, that sometimes he wondered what might have been if circumstances had been different. 6 months after Silas's death, Cal was sitting in the jailhouse going through paperwork when Marshal Hendricks rode into town. The marshal dismounted and walked in, looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you'd want to know," Hendricks said without preamble. "We found Durst." Cal looked up sharply. "Where?" "Mexico. He'd been hiding out in a border town, living under a false name. One of our informants recognized him from a wanted poster. We brought him back across the border last week." And he talked. Sang like a bird, actually, once he realized we had him dead to rights. Confirmed everything we suspected. He and Crenshaw had been partners with Samuel Ward in the Amarillo robbery. After Samuel died, Durst cut a deal with Silas Vane, told him where the gold was buried in exchange for sanctuary on the Broken V and a share of the money once Silas dug it up. What about Crenshaw? Dead. Killed in a bar fight in El Paso 2 years ago. Durst is the last one left. Cal absorbed this, feeling the final piece of the puzzle click into place. What's his sentence? 25 years minimum. He'll die in prison. Hendricks pulled out a folded document and handed it to Cal. This is for you. Official commendation from the territorial governor for your work in resolving the Amarillo case and bringing peace to Red Hollow. There's talk of you being offered a position as a territorial marshal if you want it. Cal stared at the document, at the official seals and flowery language praising his dedication to justice. It should have felt like vindication, like the culmination of 15 years of hard work. Instead, it just felt like paper. I'll stay here, he said, handing the document back. Hendricks raised an eyebrow. You sure? It's good pay, better opportunities. I'm sure. Red Hollow's my home now. These are my people. I'm not leaving. Hendricks smiled and tucked the document away. Can't say I'm surprised. You've found something here that most lawmen spend their whole lives looking for. What's that? Purpose. The real kind. Not the kind you convince yourself matters. You're right where you're supposed to be, Rowan. After Hendricks left, Cal walked out into the street and looked around at the town he'd chosen. It wasn't perfect. It still had problems. Still had people who struggled and fought and made mistakes. But it was alive in a way it hadn't been when he'd first arrived. The fear was gone, replaced by the messy, complicated business of living. He thought about Elias and Lila, starting over in California. He thought about Samuel Ward and all the choices that had led to his death. He thought about Silas Vane and the empire of greed that had crumbled into dust. And he thought about himself. The man who'd come to Red Hollow hunting ghosts and had found something he hadn't known he needed. That evening, he wrote another letter to Lila. In it, he told her about Durst's capture and the official commendation. He told her about the changes in Red Hollow, about the families building new homes and the school they were planning. And at the end, he wrote something he'd never written before. I'm grateful for what happened here, even with all the pain it caused, because it taught me that justice isn't about revenge or closing cases. It's about giving people a chance to be better than their worst moments. Your uncle understood that. He lived it every day, trying to be more than his brother's shadow. And you do the same, building a life defined by your own choices, not someone else's sins. Thank you for that lesson. It changed me. He sealed the letter and left it with the postmaster, then walked back to the jailhouse as the sun set over Red Hollow. The mountains in the distance were painted gold and crimson, and the air smelled of dust and possibility. Cal Rowan had come to this valley looking for answers about the past. What he'd found instead was a future worth fighting for. The badge on his chest didn't feel like a tool anymore. It felt like a promise, to protect, to serve, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like enough. Red Hollow was no longer a battlefield. It was a home. And Cal Rowan, once a hunter of ghosts, had finally found where he belonged. The story of the Iron Sheriff and the valley he'd saved would be told for generations, growing with each telling until the truth became legend. But the real story was simpler. It was about broken people finding a way to heal, about a town learning to trust again, and about one man discovering that redemption doesn't come from solving the past. It comes from building something better in the present. And on quiet nights, when Cal sat on the jailhouse porch and looked out at the peaceful town, he could almost hear Elias's voice on the wind, telling him the same thing he'd said that last day. Keep the badge, Sheriff. This town needs you. Cal had kept it. And in doing so, he'd found the only justice that really mattered, the kind that gave people hope for tomorrow.